would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
This is what the man Julius Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the nuclear weapon, said after witnessing his creation flatten the city of Hiroshima. He stated that the birth of the atomic weapon was a significant chapter in history, impacting the world's survival at that time and for the future. If you want to learn more about this topic or have other options, follow Biography Journey in the video, Oppenheimer, Death, Destroyer of Worlds. On a regular day in Hiroshima, the bustling industrial city of Japan, people were busy preparing for a new workday. Don't forget this memorable date and time. 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945. A U.S. strategic bomber flew over the city from 9,400 meters. A large black object fell and exploded 580 meters above the ground, giving birth to a second sun through a colossal deception. The heat generated was even higher than the natural sun, expanding to 2 kilometers. Everything within a 2-kilometer radius of the blast center turned into nothingness, disappearing without a trace. Buildings, vehicles, air, water, money, animals, and humans all turned nothing at that moment. The sky over Hiroshima lost its color as no one could see anything except the horrific light from the bomb, temporarily blinding everyone. However, the most terrifying aspect was yet to come. The bomb's explosion released air that created hot winds and heat waves that destroyed everything within a radius of over 10 kilometers. Water boiled and evaporated, and houses and trees burned. The human body's internal fluids vaporized instantly. The shockwaves spread faster than the speed of sound, flattening the city into a nuclear wasteland. All of this created the iconic mushroom cloud, symbolizing the monstrous. Born in the lively city of New York on April 22, 1904, J. Robert Oppenheimer came into this world with a mind destined for greatness. To a Jewish family, to Julius Oppenheimer, a wealthy textile importer who emigrated from Germany to the United States in 1888. Mother is artist Ella Friedman. Julius was born in Hanau, which was then part of the Hesse-Nassau province of the Kingdom of Prussia. He later immigrated to the United States. As a teenager in 1888, with nothing, no qualifications, and no knowledge of the language. Older brother, he joined a textile company and in just 10 years worked his way up to becoming an executive and ultimately a wealthy individual. Ella is originally from Baltimore. Back in 1912, the family made a big move to an apartment on the 11th floor of 155 Riverside Drive, Manhattan, an area famous for its lavish mansions and modern homes. Check out the amazing art collection, which features pieces by Pablo Picasso, Edouard Vuillard, and even 3 original paintings by the one and only Vincent van Gogh. Fun fact, Robert had a younger brother named Frank, who went on to become a physicist. Oppenheimer first attended Alcuin School, then in 1911, enrolled at the Ethical and Cultural Society School, now Fieldston Ethical Culture School, prestigious school in the Ivy League system of preparatory schools. Social reformer Felix Adler founded the school to promote moral training based on the ethical culture movement, with the slogan, "Deed before Creed." Father Oppenheimer was a longtime member of the Society for Ethical Culture and a board of directors member from 1907 to 1915. Oppenheimer was a multi-talented student, interested in English and French literature, especially in love. Likes mineralogy. He completed grades 3 and 4 in 1 year and skipped halfway through 8th grade. In his senior year of high school, he became interested in chemistry. He entered Harvard Chemistry School a year late, at the age of 18, because he contracted ulcerative colitis while surveying minerals during a family summer vacation in Jakimov, Czechoslovakia. To help him heal quickly, his father hired his English teacher, Herbert Smith, to take him to New Mexico to recuperate, where Oppenheimer fell in love with horseback riding and life in the southwestern United States. Besides majoring in chemistry, Harvard's regulations also required him to study history, literature, philosophy, or mathematics. He compensated for his late admission by taking 6 courses each semester and was accepted into the Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society. In the first year, he was admitted to graduate in physics based on his self-study results, meaning he did not have to take introductory courses and could take intensive courses. Course in thermodynamics taught by Percy Bridgman attracted him to experimental physics. Graduated with honors in just 3 years. 1924, Oppenheimer received news of acceptance to Christ's College at the University of Cambridge. He wrote to Ernest Rutherford asking permission to work at the Cavendish Laboratory. Bridgman wrote a letter of recommendation which said that Oppenheimer's clumsiness in the laboratory suggested to everyone that his strength was not experimentation, theoretical physics. Rutherford was not impressed, but Oppenheimer went to Cambridge anyway, hoping to get another position. Finally, J.J. Thomson accepted him on condition that he complete basic experimental training. He clashed with the trainer in charge of him, Patrick Blackett, who was only a few years older than him. While on vacation, as his friend Francis Ferguson recalled, Oppenheimer once confessed that he left an apple laced with toxic chemicals on Blackett's desk. While Ferguson's account is the only detailed account of the events, university officials warned Oppenheimer's parents that they were placing him on probation, not yet disciplinary but on watch. His parents successfully campaigned for him to stay. A tall, thin man who was a heavy smoker and often stopped eating during periods of intense concentration and thinking, Oppenheimer frequently worried his friends because of his self-destructive tendencies. A disturbing incident occurred when he was on vacation in Paris to visit his friend Francis Ferguson. Ferguson realized Oppenheimer was unwell, and to help ease his worries, he told Oppenheimer that he was about to marry his girlfriend, Frances Keeley. Oppenheimer did not take the news usually. He jumped on Ferguson and attempted to strangle him. Although Ferguson quickly pushed his friend away, this story made him think that Oppenheimer had severe psychological problems. Oppenheimer's life was marked by frequent battles with depression. He confided in his brother once, saying, "I need physics more than friends." Leaving Cambridge in 1926, he embarked on an incredible adventure to the University of Göttingen in Germany, where he would study under the renowned physicist Max Born. At the time, Göttingen stood as one of the foremost hubs of theoretical physics in the world. Oppenheimer befriended many of his later great successes. Don't forget these famous names: Werner Heisenberg, Pascual Jordan, Wolfgang Pauli, Paul Dirac, Enrico Fermi, and Edward Teller. People also recall that he seemed too enthusiastic in discussions, sometimes to the point of dominating seminars. This upset some of Born's other students so much that Maria Goeppert gave Born a petition signed by herself and others, threatening to boycott the class unless he silenced Oppenheimer. Born deliberately placed the letter on his desk so Oppenheimer could read it, and it worked without him saying a word. Oppenheimer received his doctorate in March 1927 at the age of 23 under the guidance of Born. After the question and answer session, James Frank, the professor who chaired the defense panel, said, "I'm lucky. The defense is over. He's asking me questions again." Oppenheimer published more than a dozen papers in Göttingen, including many significant contributions to the emerging field of quantum mechanics. He and Max Born published their famous paper on the Born-Oppenheimer approximation, which mathematically separates nuclear motion from electron motion when considering molecules, allowing nuclear motion to be eliminated to reduce computation. It remains his most cited work. You are watching a video on the channel Biography Journey. If you like this video, please give us a like and a subscribe to help our Biography Journey channel reach 100,000 subscribers soon. Thank you very much. Oppenheimer received a research fellowship from the U.S. National Research Council at the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, in September 1927. Bridgman also wanted him to go to Harvard, so the parties agreed to let him split the 1927 year class. 1928 was double, 1927 at Harvard, and 1928 at Caltech. At Caltech, he became friends with Linus Pauling, and they planned to conduct groundbreaking research on the nature of chemical bonds, a field Pauling was then pioneering, with Oppenheimer providing the mathematical solutions and Pauling the interpretations. Result: their partnership and friendship crumbled when Pauling grew suspicious of Oppenheimer's increasingly close relationship with his wife, Ava Helen Pauling. While Pauling was at work, Oppenheimer came to Pauling and his wife's home and invited Ava Helen on a date to Mexico. Although she refused and told her husband about it, Pauling's seemingly indifferent attitude caused Pauling to lose his temper and end his relationship with Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer later invited Pauling to lead the Manhattan Project's chemical division, but Pauling refused, saying he was a pacifist. In 1928, during the autumn season, Oppenheimer made a visit to Paul Ehrenfest's institute at Leiden University in the Netherlands. He left quite an impression by delivering lectures in Dutch, despite having minimal prior experience with the language. Here, he began to acquire the nickname Oppie, later translated into English as Oppie. After leaving Leiden, he continued his journey to E. Heath in Zurich, collaborate with Wolfgang Pauli on quantum mechanics and continuum spectra. Oppenheimer greatly respected and liked Pauli, and may have imitated Pauli's personal style and critical approach to problems. Returning to the United States, Oppenheimer accepted an assistant professor position at the University of California at Berkeley, where Raymond T. Burge wanted him so much that he was willing to share him with Caltech. Before becoming a professor at Berkeley, Oppenheimer developed a mild case of tuberculosis and decided to live for a few weeks with his brother Frank on a ranch in New Mexico, which he rented and eventually bought. When he heard that the farm was available for rent, he exclaimed, "Hot dog," and later called it Perro Caliente, which means hot dog in Spanish. Later, he often said that physics and the deserted countryside were his two great loves. After conquering tuberculosis, he made his triumphant return to Berkeley. There, he became known as a mentor and collaborator to a group of physicists who were inspired by his sharp intellect and wide-ranging curiosity. Many students and colleagues found him mesmerizing, passionate to the point of hypnosis in private conversations, but often cold in crowded places. Those associated with him were divided into two factions. Some saw him as a stoic, calm, and impressive genius, and others saw him as a colorful and insecure poser. Most of his students belonged to the first group, idolizing and absorbing his ways of walking, speaking, and other gestures, including his tendency to read great works in his original language. Hans Bethe said about him, "His keen sense of perception was the most essential element he brought to teaching. He always knew where the important issues were, as shown in his choice of topic. He always lived with those problems, tried to find solutions, and presented his concerns to the research team." At its peak, there were about 8 to 10 graduate students in his group and about 6 postdocs. He meets with this group once a day in his office and discusses each student's research situation. He was interested in everything, and one afternoon they could discuss quantum electrodynamics, cosmic rays, electron pair formation, and nuclear physics. He worked closely with Ernest Lawrence and other cyclotron pioneers working for Lawrence, helping them interpret the data of their instruments produced at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. In 1936, he was promoted to full professor with a generous salary of $3,300 a year. In return, Berkeley asked him to stop teaching at Caltech. So eventually, an agreement was reached that the school would give him 6 weeks per year at Caltech, just enough to teach a one-semester program. Duddy Oppenheimer's groundbreaking work spanned theoretical astronomy, nuclear physics, spectroscopy, and quantum field theory, with pivotal contributions to general relativity and nuclear theory. His research not only expanded on these theories, but also laid the foundations for quantum electrodynamics. He delved into the mathematical formalism of relativistic quantum mechanics, despite initial doubts about its viability. Notably, his work predicted the existence of neutrons, mesons, and neutron stars, foreshadowing many significant scientific discoveries to come. Back in 1926, his fascination with continuous spectrum theory led to his first paper on the quantum theory of molecular band spectra. came up with a groundbreaking method for calculating displacement probabilities, and even applied it to analyze the photoelectric effect of hydrogen. Interestingly, his calculations later turned out to be spot on when it was discovered that the sun is primarily composed of hydrogen. Oppenheimer's groundbreaking contributions to the field of cosmic ray exposure and his early work on quantum tunneling laid the foundation for some of the most fundamental theories in modern physics. In 1931, he co-authored a captivating paper on the relativistic theory of the photoelectric effect with his student Harvey Hall, where he skillfully debunked Dirac's claim about the energy levels of the hydrogen atom. Years later, his student Willis Lamb made a significant discovery, now famously known as the Lamb shift, earning Lamb the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1955. In their groundbreaking research, Oppenheimer and his first doctoral student, Melba Phillips, delved into the fascinating world of artificial radioactivity under deuteron bombardment. As they collaborated with Ernest Lawrence and Edwin McMillan, they made a pivotal discovery that closely aligned with George Gamow's predictions. However, as they ventured into higher energies and heavier nuclei, their findings deviated, leading them to develop the enduring Oppenheimer-Phillips process in 1935. This theory continues to shape our understanding of nuclear processes to this day. In 1930, Oppenheimer's groundbreaking paper hinted at the existence of positrons, predicting their presence even before they were discovered. This prediction came after Paul Dirac theorized that electrons could possess positive charge and negative energy. Dirac's remarkable work on the Dirac equation unified quantum mechanics, special relativity, and the revolutionary concept of spin to explain the Zeeman effect. Despite experimental evidence showing that protons were significantly heavier than electrons, Oppenheimer argued against the notion that electrons could have a positive charge like protons. His skepticism was proven wrong when Carl David Anderson discovered the positron just 2 years later, earning the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1936 for his groundbreaking discovery. In the late 1930s, Oppenheimer delved into the captivating world of astrophysics, likely inspired by his friendship with Richard Tolman. This new passion led to a series of groundbreaking papers that reshaped our understanding of the cosmos. Teaming up with Robert Serber, he explored the enigmatic properties of white dwarf stars in their first paper, On the Stability of Neutron Stars. This was just the beginning of Oppenheimer's astrophysical journey. In another paper, co-authored with his student George Volkoff, they revealed the Tolman-Oppenheimer-Volkoff limit, which marked a boundary beyond which stars would succumb to gravitational collapse. Their work reached its climax with the prophetic paper on continued gravitational contraction, penned with Hartland Snyder, which boldly predicted the existence of what we now call black holes. These remarkable papers played a pivotal role in reigniting astrophysics research in the United States, spearheaded by the esteemed John A. Wheeler in the 1950s. Remember this interesting fact: Oppenheimer's scientific papers were known for being quite complex, and even experts struggled to comprehend them. He had a preference for using advanced mathematical techniques to prove physical principles, although he was often criticized for making mathematical errors due to working too quickly. This led Snyder to comment, "He's fantastic at physics, but not so great at math." After World War II, Oppenheimer only published 5 scientific papers, one of which was related to biological science, and none after 1950. Murray Gell-Mann, who collaborated with him at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton in 1951, had this to say: "He didn't have Sitzfleisch or sitting flesh like when you sit in a chair. As far as I know, he has never written a long paper or made a long calculation, nothing like that. He didn't have patience for them. His work consisted of aperçu short overview papers, but quite outstanding ones. But he inspired others to work, and his influence was extraordinary. Oppenheimer's wide-ranging interests sometimes hindered his focus on specific projects. For example, in 1933, while pursuing his studies, he delved into the intricacies of Sanskrit and crossed paths with the renowned Indologist Arthur W. Ryder during his time at Berkeley. He read the Bhagavad Gita in its original Sanskrit and later considered it one of the books that shaped his philosophy of life. A close friend and colleague, Isidore Rabi, offered his interpretation. Oppenheimer's deep understanding of these areas outside the traditional scientific realm, such as his interest in religion, especially Hinduism, led to a sense of the mystical nature of the universe surrounding him like a fog. He looked at physics towards what had been accomplished, but at its boundaries, he tended to see more mystical and novel things than exist. He turned away from the rigid, crude methods of theoretical physics to enter the magical realm of broad intuition. Luis Alvarez and many other observers believe that if Oppenheimer had lived long enough to witness his predictions about gravitational collapse, neutron stars and black holes proven experimentally, he would have likely been awarded a Nobel Prize. Despite this, Oppenheimer himself considered his work on electrons and positrons to be his most important scientific contribution. Surprisingly, his contemporaries did not necessarily share this view. Although he was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Physics 3 times, in 1945, 1951, and 1967, Oppenheimer never won the prestigious award. You are watching a video on the channel Biography Journey. If you like this video, please give us a like and a subscribe to help our Biography Journey channel reach 100,000 subscribers soon. Thank you very much. In the 1920s, Oppenheimer was indifferent to worldly matters. He mentioned that he did not read newspapers or listen to the radio and only learned about the Wall Street crash of 1929 6 months after it happened through a conversation with Ernest Lawrence during a walk. He once remarked that he had only cast a vote in the 1936 election. However, from 1934 onwards, he became increasingly interested in politics and international affairs. In 1934 to 1935, he set aside 3% of his salary, around $100 per year, to support physicists fleeing Nazi Germany. During the San Francisco Dockers strike in 1934, he and some students, including Melba Phillips and Bob Serber, participated in a march with the Dockers. He often tried to help Serber secure a position at Berkeley, but was thwarted by Burge, who felt one Jew in the department is enough. Oppenheimer's mother passed away in 1931, and he grew closer to his father, who, although still living in New York, frequently visited California. When his father died in 1937, leaving an estate of $392,602, approximately $6.5 million in 2015 value, split between Oppenheimer and his brother Frank, Oppenheimer immediately wrote a will leaving his share to the University of California for graduate fellowships. Back in the 1930s, like many young intellectuals, he was all about supporting social reforms that were later labeled as leaning toward communism. He even donated money to reform efforts that were deemed subversive during the McCarthy era. His progressive actions included organizing fundraising for the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War and other anti-fascist activities. Interestingly, he never publicly joined the Communist Party USA, but he did transfer money to freelance party members through acquaintances suspected of being Communist Party members. Quite the intriguing story, don't you think? In 1936, Oppenheimer met Jean Tatlock, the daughter of a literature professor at Berkeley and a student at Stanford University. They shared similar political views. Tatlock wrote for the Western Worker, a newspaper of the Communist Party USA. Tatlock and Oppenheimer's relationship came to an end in a whirlwind of events in 1939. In August of that year, Oppenheimer encountered Catherine, Kitty, Puening Harrison, a bright student and former member of the Communist Party who had been through 3 marriages. Their initial union was short-lived. Her second husband, an active Communist Party member, tragically lost his life in the Spanish Civil War. After marrying a doctor and relocating to California in pursuit of a master's degree at UCLA, she encountered Oppenheimer, creating a minor scandal when they spent the night together following a party at Tolman's house. By the summer of 1940, Kitty had moved in with Oppenheimer at a ranch in New Mexico and made the decision to divorce her husband upon discovering that she was pregnant. Subsequently, Oppenheimer and Kitty tied the knot on November 1st, 1940. In May 1941, their first child, Peter, came into the world, and he was followed by Catherine, Tony, in Los Alamos, New Mexico on December 7, 1944. During this period, Oppenheimer maintained a relationship with Jean Tatlock. This affair later caused complications during hearings about Oppenheimer, primarily due to Tatlock's ties to the Communist Party. Many of Oppenheimer's close associates were actively involved in the Communist Party in the 1930s and 1940s, including his brother Frank, Jackie's wife Kitty, Jean Tatlock, his landlady Mary Ellen Washburn, and some of his research students at Berkeley. When Oppenheimer joined the Manhattan Project in 1942, he made a controversial statement in his security questionnaire. He claimed to be a member of virtually every organization on the West Coast fronting for the Communist Party. Years later, he denied making this statement, suggesting it may have been an exaggeration or even a joke. He was also known to subscribe to the People's World newspaper, a Communist Party publication, and admitted in 1954 that he was associated with the communist movement. Additionally, from 1937 to 1942, Oppenheimer participated in a discussion group at Berkeley, which some later referred to as a secret unit of the Communist Party, among professors at Berkeley. The FBI documented a meeting at a party member's home where Håkan Chevalier, who claimed Oppenheimer attended, along with prominent California Communist Party leader William Schneiderman and Isaac Volkov, a liaison between the American Communist Party and the Soviet NKVD, in the fall of 1940, during the Soviet-German Pact. Shortly after, the FBI added Oppenheimer to the Custodial Detention Index, meaning he was to be detained in case of a national emergency, listing him under nationalistic tendencies, communist. The debate over whether Oppenheimer was a communist sympathizer has been detailed. Most historians believe he had strong sympathies with the left wing during this period and had connections with many communists, though there is still debate over whether he formally joined the party. In 1954, he denied being a party member. Still, he considered himself a fellow traveler, defining himself as someone who agrees with most communist goals, but does not unthinkingly follow orders from any communist organization. During the atomic bomb development, Oppenheimer was investigated by the FBI and the Internal Security Unit of the Manhattan Project due to his past associations with communist groups. In June 1943, military agents trailed him on a journey to California to see his ex-girlfriend, Jean Tatlock, was battling a serious illness. He even spent a night at her apartment. Her tragic suicide on January 4, 1944, left Oppenheimer profoundly heartbroken. In August 1943, he informed Manhattan Project security officers that George Eltonton, whom he did not know, had tried to obtain nuclear secrets from 3 individuals under Oppenheimer's supervision at Los Alamos on behalf of the Soviet Union. When questioned later about this, Oppenheimer admitted that the only person who had approached him about this was his friend Håkan Chevalier, a French literature professor at Berkeley, who had privately mentioned the issue during a dinner at Oppenheimer's home. General Leslie Groves, the head of the Manhattan Project, thought that Oppenheimer was too vital to the project to be dismissed because of his questionable conduct. On July 20th, 1943, he penned a letter to the Manhattan District. Check out this historical nugget. On October 9th, 1941, right before the United States joined World War II, President Franklin Roosevelt authorized a top-secret mission to build an atomic bomb. In a bold move, security clearance was swiftly granted to Julius Robert Oppenheimer, despite any reservations officials might have had. This guy was absolutely crucial to the project. In May 1942, chairman of the National Defense Research Committee James Bryant Conant, who had taught Oppenheimer at Harvard, invited him to calculate fast neutrons, which Oppenheimer worked diligently on. He was nicknamed the Quick Break Coordinator, referring to the rapid neutron chain reaction in an atomic bomb. One of his first actions was organizing a summer lecture series on bomb theory at his workplace in Berkeley. A group of European physicists and students studying under him, including Robert Serber, Emil Konopinski, Felix Bloch, Hans Bethe, and Edward Teller, worked on calculating what needed to be done and in what sequence to build the bomb. Back in June 1942, the U.S. Army kick-started the Manhattan Project, taking charge of the atomic bomb endeavor and shifting responsibilities from the Office of Scientific Research and Development, the military. Fast forward to September, and General Groves was handed the reins to lead what was to become known as the Manhattan Project. It was under his leadership that Oppenheimer was appointed to spearhead the top-secret weapons laboratory, a choice that raised eyebrows due to Oppenheimer's distance from the conservative military circle and his lack of previous large project leadership. Yet, Groves perceived something in Oppenheimer that others didn't: profound understanding of the practicalities of developing and constructing atomic bombs, coupled with a comprehensive knowledge across various disciplines. Groves was certain that these qualities were indispensable in a multifaceted field encompassing physics, chemistry, metallurgy, explosives, and engineering. He also recognized in Oppenheimer a staggering ambition that he believed would provide the impetus necessary to drive the project to success. Isidore Rabi even referred to this appointment as truly a stroke of genius by General Groves, not usually credited with genius. Oppenheimer and Groves knew they needed the perfect spot for their top-secret laboratory, and they found it in the remote landscapes of New Mexico. After exploring different locations, they stumbled upon a promising site close to Oppenheimer's ranch. The rugged mountains and potential flooding posed some initial concerns, but Oppenheimer had the perfect solution. Flat Mesa near Santa Fe, New Mexico, home to the Los Alamos Ranch School. Despite worries about road access and water supply, the team made it work and quickly set up the impressive Los Alamos laboratory, utilizing existing structures and rapidly constructing new facilities. Here, Oppenheimer brought together a group of brilliant physicists, his bright stars, to work on their groundbreaking mission. Los Alamos initially started as a military laboratory. Oppenheimer and his fellow researchers were even commissioned into the Army. Oppenheimer was so passionate about his work that he went as far as ordering a lieutenant colonel uniform for himself and willingly underwent a military physical exam, despite failing the tests. The military doctors found him underweight at just 128 pounds, 58 kilograms, and diagnosed his chronic cough as tuberculosis, expressing concern about his chronic back pain. The plan to enlist the scientists into military units was eventually scrapped after objections from Robert Bacher and Isidore Rabi. Finally, a compromise was reached where the laboratory operated under the University of California through a contract with the War Department. Initially, Oppenheimer underestimated the scope of the project. Los Alamos expanded from a few hundred people in 1943 to over 6,000 people in 1945. Oppenheimer initially struggled with organizing large groups, but quickly learned the art of managing large-scale operations. After moving to live within the unit, he was noted for his ability to grasp all scientific aspects of the project and his efforts to control inevitable cultural conflicts between scientists and the military. As a scientific manager, he became an idolized figure among his scientific colleagues, almost an icon of what they were working towards. Victor Weisskopf expressed this by stating that Oppenheimer led these research endeavors, both theoretical and experimental, in the true sense of those words. His remarkable ability to quickly grasp the main points of any topic was a decisive factor. He could familiarize himself with the essential details of every part of the work. He did not command from an office. He was present at every crucial step. He was there in the laboratory or conference room where a new effect was measured and a new idea was formed. He offered only a few ideas or suggestions. Although he sometimes did, his primary influence came from something else. His constant, high-intensity presence created a sense of direct involvement for all of us, generated a unique atmosphere full of enthusiasm and challenges that permeated throughout that time. In 1943, the project's focus shifted to developing a gun-type fission weapon using plutonium, known as Thin Man. Initial studies on the properties of plutonium using plutonium-239 produced from a cyclotron yielded small but very pure quantities. However, when plutonium samples received from the X-10 graphite reactor at Oak Ridge showed a higher concentration of plutonium-240, making it unsuitable for use in a gun-type device, Oppenheimer abandoned the gun design in favor of an implosion device in July 1944. Through the use of chemical explosive lenses, a subcritical mass containing fissile material could converge into a denser form in a shorter amount of time, leading to the implosion method becoming the focus of a reorganization at Los Alamos in August 1944. Oppenheimer initiated a switch to a more straightforward gun-type device using uranium-235, which became Little Boy in February 1945. After a substantial research effort, a more complex design using the implosion method known as the Christie device, named after Robert Christie, was officially completed and approved on February 28, 1945. By May 1945, the interim committee was established, with Secretary of War H.L. Stimson at its helm, to advise and report to the President on wartime and post-war policies regarding the use of nuclear energy. The committee formed a scientific panel that included Compton, Fermi, Lawrence, and Oppenheimer to advise them on scientific issues. In their presentation before the interim committee, the scientific panel proposed opinions related not only to the physical effects of atomic bombs, but also to the potential military and political implications. This included addressing sensitive issues, such as whether the Soviet Union should be informed in advance about the use of atomic weapons against Japan. You are watching a video on the channel Biography Journey. If you like this video, please give us a like and a subscribe to help our Biography Journey channel reach 100,000 subscribers soon. Thank you very much. Check out this amazing historical nugget. The first nuclear test, codenamed Trinity, took place near Alamogordo on July 16, 1945. Oppenheimer, the brilliant mind behind the test, may have been inspired by a John Donne poem when choosing the codename. Watching the explosion, Oppenheimer famously quoted a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, saying, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Later in 1965, he reiterated this quote on television, reflecting on the atomic bomb's impact. Fascinating stuff. Isidore Rabi observed Oppenheimer's conflicted victory demeanor, likening his stride to a scene from High Noon. At a gathering in Los Alamos on August 6, Oppenheimer expressed regret that the bomb wasn't used against Nazi Germany. However, he and others felt remorse over the bombing of Nagasaki, considering it unnecessary militarily. Oppenheimer later expressed his discontent to Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson and advocated for nuclear disarmament. Despite his reservations, Oppenheimer received the Medal for Merit in 1946 for his leadership at Los Alamos, despite a strained meeting with President Truman over his moral concerns regarding the bombings. After the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Manhattan Project stepped out of the shadows. J. Robert Oppenheimer took center stage as a prominent face of science, gracing the covers of magazines like Life and Time. The emergence of nuclear physics ushered in a new era of political and strategic power for nations around the world. Oppenheimer, like many of his peers, championed the idea that international cooperation through organizations like the United Nations was vital to preventing nuclear arms races and ensuring global security. After leaving Los Alamos in November 1945, Oppenheimer returned to Caltech, but found that teaching didn't ignite his passion. In 1947, he made an exciting decision to accept an offer from Lewis Strauss to lead the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. This opportunity meant moving to the East Coast and leaving behind Ruth Tolman, the wife of his friend Richard Tolman, with whom he had developed a relationship after his time in Los Alamos. The new role offered a generous salary of $20,000 per year and included a grand 17th-century estate with a chef and staff, situated on 265 acres of forest. Oppenheimer's bold vision for the newly established institute brought together a fascinating mix of intellectuals from diverse fields. He inspired renowned scientists like Freeman Dyson and the celebrated duo of Yang Chen-ning and Li Zhengdao, whose groundbreaking work on parity violation later earned them Nobel Prizes. In a move that raised some eyebrows, Oppenheimer also welcomed scholars from the humanities, including luminaries like T.S. Eliot and George F. Kennan. However, not everyone was on board with this interdisciplinary approach, with some mathematicians advocating for a singular focus on pure scientific research. Abraham Peiss later reflected on Oppenheimer's regret about not fully realizing his goal of uniting scholars from both the natural sciences and humanities at the Institute. A series of conferences in New York from 1947 to 1949 saw physicists transition from wartime work to theoretical issues. Under Oppenheimer's leadership, physicists tackled the remaining significant problems in physics from the pre-war years. Infinities, divergences, and ambiguities in quantum electrodynamics of elementary particles. Julian Schwinger, Richard Feynman, and Shinichiro Tominaga resolved the problem and developed techniques later known as renormalization. Freeman Dyson successfully demonstrated that their processes yielded similar results. Meson absorption problem and Hideki Yukawa's theory on the role of mesons as carriers of nuclear solid force were also addressed. Following Oppenheimer's guidance, Robert Marshak proposed the two-meson hypothesis, suggesting the existence of two types of meson, pions and muons. This led to Cecil Frank Powell's breakthrough in discovering the pion, later earning him a Nobel Prize. The Atomic Energy Commission, a member of the advisory committee to the Interim Committee, had a significant influence on the Aikson-Lilienthal report. The report called for establishing an international atomic development agency to control all fissile materials and their production method, such as uranium mines, laboratories, and nuclear power plants, peaceful energy production. Bernard Baruch translated this report into a proposal to the United Nations known as the Baruch Plan in 1946. The Baruch Plan included additional provisions related to mandatory inspections, particularly requiring scrutiny of the Soviet Union's uranium resources. The Baruch Plan was seen as an effort to maintain U.S. nuclear monopoly and was rejected by the Soviet Union. This led Oppenheimer to realize that an arms race was becoming inevitable due to mutual suspicion between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, a situation that even made Oppenheimer uneasy. After establishing the Atomic Energy Commission, AEC, in 1947, as a civilian agency overseeing nuclear research and weapons issues, Oppenheimer was appointed the General Advisory Committee, chairman. In this role, he advised on various atomic problems, including research funding, laboratory construction, and international policy. Although the committee's advice was not always heeded. As the JC chairman, Oppenheimer advocated for global arms control and investment in basic science, aiming to steer policies away from a heated arms race. When the government questioned whether to pursue an accelerated program to develop fusion-based nuclear weapons, such as the hydrogen bomb, Oppenheimer initially recommended against it, despite supporting the development of such a weapon during the Manhattan Project. Part of his motivation was ethical concern, as he believed such a weapon would only be used as a strategic weapon targeting civilian populations, resulting in the deaths of millions. He also had practical concerns, as, at that time, a feasible design for a hydrogen bomb was not apparent. Oppenheimer felt it was better to allocate resources to build a large arsenal of fission weapons. He and others were particularly concerned about nuclear reactors transitioning from producing plutonium to tritium. However, they were sidelined by Truman, who announced an urgent program after the Soviet Union tested their first atomic bomb in 1949. Oppenheimer and others on the committee opposed this project, especially James Conant, feeling marginalized and considering resigning from the committee. Ultimately, they chose to stay, but their views on the hydrogen bomb became widely known. However, in 1951, Edward Teller and mathematician Stanislaw Ulam successfully designed what later became known as the Teller-Ulam design for the hydrogen bomb. This new design proved technically feasible, and Oppenheimer changed his opinion. He later recalled, "The program we had in 1949 was foolish, and you could argue that it had little meaning. So you could argue that you didn't want it even if you could. The 1951 program was so clean you couldn't argue about it anymore. The issues had become purely military, political, and humanitarian, about what you would do with it once you had it." The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover's leadership, monitored Oppenheimer even before the war due to his communist sympathies. At the same time, he was a professor at Berkeley and had close relationships with many Communist Party members, including his wife and brother. He was closely surveilled from the early 1940s, with bugs placed in his home and office, his phone tapped, and his mail opened. The FBI provided Oppenheimer's political adversaries with evidence of his communist ties. Among these adversaries was Strauss, another member of the AEC, who harbored resentment towards Oppenheimer for his opposition to the hydrogen bomb and embarrassing Strauss before Congress years earlier, when Strauss opposed exporting radioactive isotopes to other countries for strategic purposes. To which Oppenheimer sarcastically remarked that these isotopes were less important than electronic gadgets but more important, see, for example, vitamins. On June 7, 1949, Oppenheimer made a compelling appearance before the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, openly discussing his involvement with the Communist Party during the 1930s. During his testimony, he also revealed that some of his former students, including esteemed individuals like David Bohm, Giovanni Rossi Lomanitz, Philip Morrison, Bernard Peters, and Joseph Weinberg, had affiliations with the party while working with him at Berkeley. Adding to the intrigue, Frank Oppenheimer and his wife Jackie also addressed their past communist associations during their testimony before the HUAC. The aftermath was shocking. Frank was dismissed from the University of Minnesota. After facing several years of adversity in finding physics-related work, he took an unexpected turn and became a cattle rancher in Colorado. Later, he transitioned into teaching high school physics and delved into educational reform, ultimately leaving an indelible mark by founding the renowned Exploratorium in San Francisco. Oppenheimer was involved in controversies and power struggles from 1949 to 1953. Edward Teller, who was not interested in atomic bomb research at Los Alamos during the war, was allowed by Oppenheimer to work on his project on the hydrogen bomb. Teller eventually left Los Alamos in 1951 to help establish a second laboratory, later Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Here, he was freed from the constraints at Los Alamos to develop the hydrogen bomb. Strategic long-range nuclear weapons would require jet bombers, falling under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Air Force. Oppenheimer advocated for tactical nuclear weapons for limited warfare, which would be helpful on a battlefield against enemy forces and, therefore, fall under the Army's control. The two branches of the military competed for control over nuclear weapons, aligning with different factions. The Air Force, which Teller supported, gained influence under the Republican administration after Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected president in 1952. Take a trip back in time to the 1950s, when the drama surrounding J. Robert Oppenheimer's security clearance suspension unfolded. Picture a tale of political maneuvering, leaked secrets, and a controversial hearing that captivated the nation. It all started with a letter raising allegations against Oppenheimer, leading to a high-stakes battle involving influential figures like Strauss, Senator Brian McMahon, and Kenneth D. Nichols. An intense hearing took place, initially shrouded in secrecy, but details eventually made their way to the press, focusing on Oppenheimer's past affiliations and connections. Adding to the intrigue, prosecuting attorney Roger Robb leaked information and stirred up controversy by violating procedural principles. A full transcript of this riveting hearing was finally released more than 60 years later, shedding light on this captivating chapter in history. In a dramatic turn of events during the hearing, Oppenheimer's past statements came under intense scrutiny. It was revealed that he had fabricated a story about George Eltonton approaching scientists at Los Alamos, a revelation that shocked many. Oppenheimer seemed taken aback when transcripts from his conflicting past testimonies were presented, as he had not been given the chance to review them beforehand. As a result of his testimony, Håkon Chevalier, his friend, lost his job as Oppenheimer had named him without informing him. Both Chevalier and Eltonton admitted to discussing passing information to the Soviets, but both denied any involvement in espionage. The testimony from various witnesses cast a shadow of uncertainty over the entire affair. Teller, for his part, offered a conflicting yet sympathetic view, stating that he believed Oppenheimer was loyal to the country, but his testimony left lingering questions in the air. The following statement had a profound impact on Oppenheimer and sparked outrage within the scientific community. Teller faced social ostracization from academic circles due to these words, and Groves, under the threat of FBI pursuit, testified against Oppenheimer, like his actions involving Chevalier in 1943. Apart from Teller, many top scientists and figures in the government and military testified in support of Oppenheimer. The inconsistencies in testimonies and his reckless behaviors during the hearing, at times saying he was put into a cock-and-bull story, that it was because he was a fool, made some members of the panel believe he was erratic, unreliable, and thus a security threat. Ultimately, Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked a day before it expired. Isidore Rabi commented that, regardless, Oppenheimer was merely a government advisor, and not always listened to, so if the government didn't want to consult him, then don't. During the hearing, Oppenheimer voluntarily disclosed the questionable behavior of many of his colleagues. Assuming Oppenheimer's security clearance was not revoked, he would likely be remembered as a pointing finger to save the reputations of others. But with his outcome, most of the scientific community saw him as a martyr persecuted by McCarthyism, a moderate liberal attacked unfairly by warmongering enemies. Werner von Braun sarcastically remarked before a congressional committee, "If in England, Oppenheimer should have been knighted." During a presentation at the Woodrow Wilson Institute on May 20, 2009, based on notes taken from KGB files, John Earl Hames, Harvey Clare, and Alexander Vasilyev confirmed that Oppenheimer was never involved in espionage activities for the Soviet Union. KGB tried to recruit him continuously but was unsuccessful. Oppenheimer never betrayed the United States. Additionally, he dismissed several individuals from the Manhattan Project who had sympathies with the Soviet Union. Haines, Clare, and Vasilyev also affirmed that Oppenheimer was a secret member of the American Communist Party in the late 1930s. According to biographer Ray Monk, he was, in practical terms, a supporter of the Communist Party. Furthermore, considering the time, effort, and money he put into party activities, one might say he was a very active supporter. In his later years, starting from 1954, Oppenheimer spent several months each year living on St. John Island in the Virgin Islands. In 1957, he purchased a 2-acre plot at Gibney Beach, where he built a house near the rocky coastline. He enjoyed sailing with his daughter Toni and wife Kitty. Growing increasingly concerned about the potential dangers to humanity from scientific advancements, Oppenheimer joined Albert Einstein, Bertrand Russell, Joseph Rotblat, and other prominent scientists and scholars to establish what later became the World Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1960. Despite not signing any significant anti-nuclear weapons protest statements in the 1950s, such as the Russell-Einstein Manifesto in 1955, or attending the first Pugwash Conference on Science and World Affairs in 1957, Oppenheimer continued to emphasize the challenges of managing the power of knowledge in a world where political concerns hindered the free exchange of scientific ideas. During this time, Oppenheimer gave speeches and wrote articles highlighting the difficulty of balancing intellectual power in a world where political constraints impeded the free exchange of scientific ideas. He participated in the Reith Lectures, a BBC program in 1953, later published as Science and the Common Understanding. In 1955, Oppenheimer published The Open Mind, a collection of 8 lectures from 1946 onwards on nuclear weapons and popular culture. He rejected the idea of a foreign policy based on nuclear weapons, stating that a nation's goals in foreign policy could not be achieved through coercion. In 1957, 2 philosophy and psychology departments at Harvard invited Oppenheimer to lecture at the William James Lectures. Despite opposition from some influential Harvard alumni, Oppenheimer delivered 6 lectures titled The Hope of Order to an audience of around 1,200 people. He also presented the Whidden Lectures at McMaster University in 1962, later published in 1964 as The Flying Trapeze: 3 Crises for Physicists. Oppenheimer lost his power but continued teaching, writing, and researching physics. He traveled to Europe and Japan to lecture on the history of science, the role of science in society, and the nature of the universe. In September 1957, France awarded him the Legion of Honor, and on May 3, 1962, he was elected as a foreign member of the Royal Society of London. At the urging of his friends who held positions of power, President John F. Kennedy decided to award Oppenheimer the Enrico Fermi Award in 1963 to restore his political honor. Edward Teller, who received the award the previous year, also recommended Oppenheimer for the prize, hoping to reconcile with Due to Kennedy's assassination shortly after, President Lyndon Johnson presented the award, recognizing Oppenheimer for his contributions to theoretical physics, as a master and creator of ideas, and for his leadership at the Los Alamos Laboratory and the atomic energy program during critical years. Oppenheimer told Johnson, "I think it took quite a bit of moral courage and bravery on your part, Mr. President, to present this award today." The restoration of honor through the award was largely symbolic, as Oppenheimer still did not have security clearance or any influence on official policies. However, along with the award came a tax-free prize of $50,000, which angered many Republican figures in the House of Representatives. Jacqueline Kennedy, a widow of President Kennedy, who was still living in the White House at the time, made a political gesture by meeting Oppenheimer to express how much her late husband wanted him to receive the medal. In 1959, when he was still a senator, Kennedy played a crucial role in a vote that ultimately ended the political career of Louis Strauss, Oppenheimer's adversary, who desired a seat as the U.S. Secretary of Commerce. This was partly a result of the scientific community's lobbying to seek revenge for Oppenheimer. In late 1965, doctors discovered that Oppenheimer had throat cancer. After an inconclusive surgery, he underwent radiation and chemotherapy in late 1966, which was unsuccessful. He fell into a coma on February 15, 1967, and passed away at his home in Princeton, New Jersey, on February 18 at the age of 62. A memorial service was held at Alexander Hall at Princeton University a week later, attended by over 600 people from the scientific, political, and military communities, including Bethy, Groves, Kennan, Lilienthal, Robbie, Smith, and Wigner. His brother Frank and relatives were also present, along with historian Arthur M. Schlesinger Jr., writer John O'Hara, and George Balanchine, director of a ballet school in New York. Betha, Kennan, and Smith delivered short eulogies. Oppenheimer's remains were cremated, and his ashes, brought by Kitty, were scattered into the sea near his home. You are watching a video on the channel Biography Journey. If you like this video, please give us a like and a subscribe to help our Biography Journey channel reach 100,000 subscribers soon. Thank you very much. When Oppenheimer left power in 1954, he was seen as a symbol of the naivety of scientists who believed they could control how their research was used by others, the government. He was also viewed as a symbol of the ethical responsibilities of scientists in the nuclear age. The hearings had political motivations, as Oppenheimer was seen as a representative of the old government, Democratic Party, and also driven by personal animosity with Louis Strauss. The external reason for the hearings, which put Oppenheimer among the ranks of free intellectuals, was his opposition to the hydrogen bomb based on technical and moral grounds. Once technical issues were resolved, he supported Teller's hydrogen bomb because he believed the Soviet Union would eventually build one if not. Instead of consistently opposing the anti-communist movement in the late 1940s and early 1950s, Oppenheimer also admitted to opposing former colleagues and students before and during the hearing. In one case, selective leaks of testimony incriminating his former student Bernard Peters were made to the press. Historians interpret this as an attempt by Oppenheimer to appease his government colleagues and perhaps divert attention from his previous communist associations and his brother. Ultimately, this backfired on Oppenheimer, as it was believed that introducing him to the Manhattan Project was reckless or at least contradictory if he honestly doubted Peters' loyalty. The public perception of Oppenheimer's struggles is a clash between right-wing military figures, represented by Teller, and left-wing intellectuals, represented by Oppenheimer, on the ethical issue of using mass destruction weapons. The question of scientists' responsibility to humanity, inspired Bertolt Brecht's play Galileo, 1955, influenced Friedrich Dürrenmatt's The Physicists, and served as the basis for John Adams' opera Dr. Atomic. 2005, portraying Oppenheimer as a modern Faust. Einar Kippardt's play, In the Matter of J. Robert Oppenheimer, appeared on West German television and was later staged in Berlin and Munich in October 1964. Oppenheimer's objections led to a correspondence with Kippardt, where the playwright proposed edits while preserving the essence of the play. It premiered in New York in June 1968, with Joseph Wiseman playing Oppenheimer. New York Times theater critic Clive Barnes called it passionate and partisan play, supporting Oppenheimer but depicting him as a tragic fool and genius. Oppenheimer was uncomfortable with this portrayal and threatened to sue the playwright after reading the script post-performance, criticizing the discordant notes with history and the nature of the people involved. In a later interview, Oppenheimer expressed his displeasure with the depiction. "That whole damn thing, the security hearing, was a farce, and those people tried to make a tragedy out of it. I never said I was sorry for participating responsibly in creating the bomb. I said that perhaps he, Kiphart, had forgotten Guernica, Coventry, Hamburg, Dresden, Dachau, Warsaw, and Tokyo. But I don't, and if he finds that too confusing, he should write a play about something else." His students and colleagues remember Oppenheimer as an outstanding researcher, a dedicated mentor, and the founder of modern theoretical physics in the United States. He needed to delve deeper into a single topic despite rapidly changing scientific interests to achieve Nobel recognition. However, his foundational contributions to black hole theory could have warranted such an honor had he lived to see them confirmed by astronomers. A minor planet, 6785 Oppenheimer, and the Oppenheimer impact crater on the Moon are named in his honor. Oppenheimer is regarded as a military advisor, policy consultant, and a critical figure in the transitional period of the interaction between science and the military, as well as the rise of big science. During World War II, scientists became increasingly involved in military research to an unprecedented extent. Faced with the threat of fascism to Western civilization, many willingly contributed their technological expertise to aid the Allied efforts, leading to crucial developments like radar, proximity fuses, and operational research. Transitioning from a knowledgeable theoretical physicist to a disciplined military organizer, Oppenheimer symbolizes the shift in the perception that scientists are often seen as heads in the clouds, and that knowledge of seemingly esoteric topics like atomic nuclear structure has no real-world applications.